It is more human, it is more natural, it is more Christian to live in such a way that you know and you trust and you collaborate and you support and you help people in your community. Our community should be an extension of our families. The goal of a society really is to form friends, to come together with people of like mind, who collaborate and therefore can attain a common good which is greater than can be had individually. That is why the ancient philosopher said that the polis, the city, the expanded family really is the perfection of human life. When it functions properly, it can do more than an individual. It can do more than a family. And therefore, it is a way of life that we ought to try and recover. And I will attempt to lay out that case in 4 points. We'll see if I get through them all. 4 reasons why living naturally and humanly, according to the Catholic golden principle of subsidiarity, is something that helps us also live our faith. In the parable today, you heard about seed that fell on various types of ground. Some fell on rocky ground, some fell amidst the thorns, some was borne off by the birds, and some fell on good ground, where it put down roots and bore fruit 100-fold. This is true of each one of us. We are given this seed, the Word of God, the gospel, or you could also take it for grace, the grace that God instills in our hearts. But the soil will have a tremendous impact on how much fruit is born by that seed. Not only in our own soul and its preparations, its resiliency to the influences of the world and the things that would choke it out, but for our purposes today, that soil can also stand for the community in which we live. And this is rather commonsensical. Parents, would you rather raise your children in a community which has good schools, good teachers, good peers, other people who will set a good Christian example that will support your children in good education, in good virtuous formation? Or would you rather have your children in a situation which is just the opposite? Schools in which we have no idea what is being taught, or nefarious things are being taught, in which you have no idea what kinds of influences they are being subjected to. Given the same child in these two different situations, will you have the same outcome? No. Same child, 2 different situations. Probably, prescinding from whatever God's providence may deign to do, you will probably have 2 different outcomes. It's just human nature. You can't get away from this. It is like seed that falls either on good and fertile soil or falls on something which will not support it, not allow it to put down roots. And so it is with our society, whether it supports our growth in Christian life, strengthens it, or is ever warring against it and weakening it. And so here are just some of the ways in which living in a smaller, more humane way is conducive to Christian life. The first is that it provides self-sufficiency. And this is different, perhaps, than just kind of that rugged American individualism that says, I don't need anyone, I don't want anyone, I can do everything on my own, don't tread on me. That, in fact, is also opposed to some of these principles that we're talking about. Rather, on a most basic level, man who is made in the image and likeness of God is also, in virtue of that, given the capacity to be provident. It's one of the ways in which he imitates God, who provides for all things, who providently governs the whole of creation from end to end sweetly, as the Scriptures tell us. And man who is made in the image and likeness of God is also given the capacity to provide for himself, for his family, for others, for his community. It is very interesting that despite being the greatest of all material creation, man, that he comes into the world the most helpless of all. Most of the animals come into the world fit with everything they need, whether it's their fur, their blubber, their wings, or their claws. Half the animals of the world are hatched and they never see their parents again, so to speak. They have everything that they need. Whereas man, which is the most exalted of material creation, given dominion over the world, he comes into the world the most helpless of all. Isn't that ironic? If you and I had not been diligently cared for and watched over and loved and nourished, we would not have made it 1 week. And so already you see how natural it is for us to be dependent upon community. We wouldn't be here without it. But furthermore, as man grows and as his reason dawns, he slowly acquires the capacity to provide for himself, which exceeds all of the animals. He isn't born into the world with fur or blubber or claws or wings. He's born naked and shivering and in need of food and sustenance. But with time, he can make tools. He can make farms. He can make clothes. He can make shelters. He can build up communities. And later on, who knows what other kinds of things he might accomplish. He can do practically unlimited things in virtue of this thing, reason, which helps make him in the image and likeness of God. In modern times, that reason has allowed us to do some astounding things. Modern man seems particularly proud of all of his technological achievements. Some of that may be warranted. Some of it may not be. But here's something to consider. Here is a new irony, which is of man's own making. We can go to the moon. We can look to the edges of the galaxy. We can communicate instantly across the globe. And yet, so some statistics say, if the lights went out, if one did not have access to a grocery store, that the overwhelming majority of Americans would not know how to find their next meal. It's quite an irony, isn't it? That man, to whom it is given to be provident, to be able to provide for himself in particular ways, despite his great pride and all of his other advances, could not provide for himself in some of the most basic ways now. Perhaps it's a terrible blind spot born of that ancient vice which we call hubris, which tends to blind the mind. We're so proud of everything we've done, but really, it wouldn't take much to pull the carpet out from under our feet, and there, where would we be? Perhaps doing even less than those old cavemen and Cretans, which we now so despise, right? Modern man, he can do anything, except when you pull the plug. And it is in keeping with our Christian dignity to be able to provide in these basic ways for ourselves, for our communities, for our families. And so learning to live more locally, not dependent upon others, is a good thing. And as I said, this isn't just about don't tread on me, I can do whatever I want, I'm going to go be a homesteader and ignore everyone else. That's not what we're saying. But being able to provide for ourselves and our families, our community, that is a good thing. That is something in keeping with our Christian dignity. And it is also a powerful defense against tyranny. Tyranny, in whatever form, especially communism, socialism, globalism, whatever you're going to call it these days, how does it make such inroads? How does it advance to such a point that it has a stranglehold on a greater part of the world right now? How did that happen? I can't imagine its philosophy was terribly attractive. Has anyone read Karl Marx? Not terribly attractive. How does it work? It's really pretty simple. It's kind of the old carrot and stick thing. Here, we'll give you this. We'll provide for that. Don't worry, you don't have to do it. We're going to provide for everything. We'll provide for the food. We'll provide for the health care. Maybe one day we'll provide a universal basic income. Don't worry. We'll take care of you. And I don't know where along the lines exactly we kind of went astray, but something happened such that we are now in a position where if the overlords take the carrot away, what are most people going to do? At some point, we stopped being self-sufficient enough and too dependent that those upon whom we depend can now dictate most of the terms. That's tyranny. So, point number one. We can be more self-sufficient. Don't worry, 2, 3, and 4 are a little faster. Number two, it helps us to grow in virtue. It's very simple. I'll give you one. Justice. What is justice? to give to others according to their need and according to your capacity. How would you know what that is? Does it not seem that modern charity is almost indistinguishable from advertising? How many pieces of mail or email do you get that just say, give here, check this box, 10, 20%, $100, $500, we need more, give more. So maybe you send something off and you have no idea what happens. And how would you know when it's a real need? Or maybe just part of the annual drive, so to speak. You're going to get the same mail no matter what. We need more, we need more. And when our Lord says in the Scriptures, he said, if one of your neighbors comes to you and knocks on your door and asks you for a piece of bread, you should give it. But when's the last time a neighbor came knocking on your door asking for a piece of bread? Has it ever happened? We are so disconnected from one another, we don't even know the real needs that we have. And things like prudence. One of the properties of prudence is it discerns. How do you discern your economic transactions now? I know what I do sometimes. I go on Amazon and look at the product which has the most 5 stars. And yet the end result is the same. You buy some cheap Chinese product and you still feed the beast of Amazon. And the extent of your prudence was just reading a few reviews. Whatever happened, I'll go down the street and buy it from so-and-so because he's a good man. He's honest. I'll buy from him. When do we ever do that? A quick story that I was told by my father when I was young, but it made an impression upon me. He was sent by his father to the little country store or something and handed a check and told to get these items. He went to the store, went to the clerk, and handed him the check. The clerk looked at him and says, "Didn't you see the sign? No checks allowed." And my father said, "Well, my dad sent me to pick these things up, and he said that you would provide them." The clerk takes off his glasses and said, "Are you Frank's boy?" My dad said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, that's fine. We'll take it." It sounds rather quaint, but ask yourself, in a day and age in which you can only talk to switchboards or electronic surveys or customer service halfway across the world, which cares not a whit about what you are asking. The very possibility of these kinds of human interactions are almost nil, aren't they? And so the second point is the virtues, which are an essential part of our Christian sanctification, are most fostered in the soil of good community, in which you know one another, learn about one another, support one another, maybe sometimes challenge one another, provide for one another. Which leads very quickly to the third point. In a community that is truly organized according to the Catholic golden principle of subsidiarity, it is the most fertile soil by which you can build relationships, which is to say, friends. Friendship is one of the greatest gifts in this life. It's one of the greatest gifts of heaven. For in very technical theological language, even St. Thomas Aquinas will say that charity, which is what God is, and charity, which is the essential activity of heaven, charity is a form of friendship. Friendship with God and friendship with the communion of saints. Our modern artificial way of living is not conducive to forming real friends. And if people think that they're making hundreds or thousands of friends on Facebook, then they're mistaken. That's not real friendship. And the Scriptures teach us of this as well. Let us do good to all, but first to the household of faith. Which leads now to the last point. In addition to helping us to be provident for ourselves and our families, helping us to grow in virtue, supporting one another, and therefore to build relationships and friendships, there is one thing that the modern world seems almost entirely bereft of, and that is a sense of peace. A massive portion of the modern world is living on antidepressants. A very large portion of our own society, I think by one survey, more than half of all Americans reported suffering from angst or anxiety. I don't think that was true 100 years ago. That the majority of society would suffer from anxiety? Why is that? And I'm not saying that simply living in a small community will remove all those things, but I am saying that the fact that we human beings as social animals are living in an antisocial and artificial way, it is no surprise that we would experience anxiety or turmoil in our souls. Some of our anxiety comes from seeing the state in the world around us and being very uncertain. As I reflect on that, and I do often, I think to myself, and I'll share with you, one of the things that would make me afraid. I don't want to die any more than the next man. I don't. And if I think about maybe withering away in some place of solitary confinement, that's a rather frightful thought. But on the other hand, if I were to think about being in the trenches with my friends, with my family, with all of you, all of a sudden, a lot of that fear just fades away. I'm not saying it'll be easy. And of course, God will give the grace for whatever is needed. But just the difference, reflecting on those two scenarios. You're thinking of the song of the scaffold, thinking of those Carmelites, one after another, boom, 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 watching their sisters lose their heads. And they did so joyfully while singing to the Blessed Mother. To think about doing something like that with my friends, with my family, knowing that the very next minute we might all be together in heaven. That's not so bad, is it? I think there's a great deal more peace in that. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.